What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to talk about the overall market and break down some cycles that could be playing out from the way the market's moving. When we talk about SPY and the QQQ and talk about some important things to watch for the next couple of months as well. But just note that I'm not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. Anyways, guys, as you guys know, one thing that's worth mentioning about the markets is the fact that there are many cycles that lead to different pieces of volatility. So there's some periods where SPY, the market is bullish, it's pumping, it's pumping, it's pumping. Other periods where it's dumping like crazy. But the question is, what's developing right here? What is my theory on how this could end up looking like? And I personally suspect that when you kind of draw out cycles like these that are equidistant, they do tend to give us some more interesting looking pieces of volatility that align very, very nicely. And then simultaneously, there might be different ways to draw this out. Maybe you can move the lines differently, but this is just like an example where the lines are equidistant. And you can see how these time periods do play out very, very interestingly for the markets. But just note a couple of things. The first thing I want to mention is that for the week, we have NVIDIA's earnings, which is going to be very important. We'll see what this leads to, especially because of the fact that NVIDIA is going to be a big catalyst for the markets. And then we have a lot of data coming out. We have like GDP numbers on Thursday. On Friday, we have PCE data and lots of factors like that. So, what do I see for the markets? One thing worth mentioning is the fact that the market does move in these interesting cycles, especially as we have election years. And historically, what tends to happen, and this is what's aligning really interestingly to the markets, in my opinion, is the fact that the market tends to be very bullish during pre-election years or even election years. The chart's very similar, anyways. But during these election years, you tend to see the market rally, 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 approaching the month of July. And if you look at the charts, we essentially did the same thing. We just rallied and rallied and rallied, approaching July. And then what this shows you is that in August, as we approach August, we tend to see a sell-off before we continue higher. If you look at the charts, August comes right about here. We get this big sell off approaching August before we continued higher back to those all time highs. The chart tends to do this. And once we approach the all time highs again, we do tend to slow down near the very beginning of September. So we tend to get a little slowdown in the beginning to like towards the end of September, another pump in October before we continue lower for the final bottom before the market sees an end of the year squeeze. So that is what tends to happen during these election years. And then notice not only how well this aligned, but also the fact that we have these cycles playing out. So I'm not saying that I objectively believe that this is always going to be the case. I don't think cycles are always perfect, but they do have a tendency of playing out a lot of the time. So notice this first cycle right here. We're going to start from like right here. SPY was at this peak at 524 back in April. We got this sell-off cycle right here to 496. As soon as we hit the end of the cycle, we see a big reversal, and the cycle continues to remain bullish for many, many periods. So during this first cycle, we push up, we start dipping towards the end of the cycle, we push up again, we start dipping a little bit towards the end of the cycle, we start pushing for the peak, and then this was the reversal signal. Remember, these charts and these lines are equidistant, and look how well this aligns. So we see this peak right here. We get this big sharp decline approaching August 5th. Then we see a V-shaped recovery, and now the next ending of this cycle is approaching as soon as like Tuesday/Wednesday, depending on how you draw this. You could even like make these a little more narrow. So what I suspect is going to happen is, and this is what I find very interesting, SPY is approaching the all-time high. I have it on my cursor right here. That's going to be around that 565 area. Now, historically, every time a SPY hits 563, 565, we get these rejections. We have this bearish engulfing candle that started to form, and you could see how tough this area tends to be, because this is reminding me of this instant right here where we had this bearish engulfing candle. We tried to push a little bit only to start dipping, and I think we might see something very similar because we're approaching the month of September, and when it comes to cyclicals, once you're in September, we do tend to, historically, we do push a little bit more before we continue to dip. But my concern about the way we're pushing is the fact that we have a large bearish divergence developing. Even if we do break towards the all-time high or even break it, our MACD will still have that. And then when you look at the 1 hour or even the 4 hour, there's a large bearish divergence that's just continuing to develop. So what I mean by that is the chart's been uptrending, but the MACD is kind of slowing down with the volume declining. And then simultaneously, if you look at the 1 hour time frame, this is a big one. The 1 hour is still showing that the market's pushing, but our MACD is declining, so is the RSI. This is another signal that we could be trying to top. And then when you look at the VIX, you'll notice that the VIX attempted to break it only to get this big rejection. But the VIX is still forming a very, very nice looking structure right here. It's trying to hold this 14 area, and we'll have to see if we could get some kind of balance or not if this does try to develop anything else. For now, the VIX is kind of dipping a bit, which suggests that the market may go a little bit higher. So I think the market may attempt to climb higher. I still hold that view, but there's a big but. I don't know if we're going to break all-time highs. So what is starting to look very probable is the fact that when you generally hit these key Fibonacci retracement areas and make a full V-shaped recovery, if you are going to form a nice cup and handle, we do tend to get at least 15-point retracements. So if you were to draw this out like this, right? If you take our key Fibonacci retracement area, just like this, especially on the daily time frame, you will notice that we have this key support very close to our 0.768 area, which aligns with our 553 area. And then our gap fill aligns with the 0.618. So generally what's going to happen is when you get to all-time highs, if you do get some kind of rejection during this next cycle, you do tend to revisit either the 0.786 or the 0.618 retracement area before we try to continue higher. And I suspect that that's what's going to happen. I think that this is what it's going to basically look like. So um, whether we do end up dipping to those key levels or not depends on different factors. But I suspect that this is what SPY is going to essentially do. I think that we're going to attempt to push higher, basically. We're going to attempt to go a little bit higher. I don't know if NVIDIA will be the thing that causes us to pump or something else, but I have a feeling that the market is going to attempt to go a little bit higher. Maybe either we get stopped at 563 or 565, but I think the upside potential is very limited. I think we're forming a giant cup right over here. Now, generally, when we hit the next cycle, whether it's a day earlier, I can't make this perfect, but this cycle right here would add to the downwards pressure, and we're going to be approaching our 20 EMA. So I suspect we will be looking for a bigger decline, especially after that bearish engulfing candle formed. And I suspect that we're going to most likely see this resistance kind of slow us down because SPY pumped really hard to resistance. That 565 area is very tough, very stubborn. So I wouldn't be surprised if we either go a little bit higher. We could push a little bit higher, but this resistance may slow us down. And for the next 1 to 2 weeks, we're going to be looking for a little decline right here. I think that that would take us down to at least 550, 553 at the very least. If not, um, down to the 540s to fill this first gap. It's got to be one of those. The low 550s should be coming, if not that gap fill. And we're going to be watching to see how low we go. But then we're going to be hitting the next cycle. And the next cycle aligns very well with FOMC. So it's possible FOMC causes another pump. And then we continue this nice climb back up to all-time highs. And we start to squeeze to new highs after that. And that would take us towards mid-October for another potential rally, which is going to be followed by one more dump. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you look at the cycle, this is what it looks like historically. This happens the large majority of the time when we look at our change right over here. So you can see how the market had a tendency of kind of dipping down. Uh, you know, as we approach August, a little bit in early August, we start a rally into September. Then we get this rally towards the end of September. I suspect this is going to play out a little bit earlier. So I think that we may get the decline a little bit earlier. It may start in early September instead. And then followed by that rally, we get that big sell off that tends to happen in October. So this period right here in October is when we get that sell off before we get very bullish after the election. So I suspect that that's what we're going to be looking out for. We'll see if we get one more sharp decline in October, like down here, approaching the election, as we have these gaps to fill. And so we'll see. We'll see which gaps we end up filling first before we continue this nice pump to new highs and then a nice rally for the end of the year. But I do suspect the market's going to likely follow this trend just like this, based off fib levels and based off where we tried to run. Also, if you look at this from cyclicals, we're approaching the end of a cycle, which does tend to lead to possible shifts as we're hitting this tough resistance. So resistance is going to be very tough. We'll see if we break through this or not. And then if we do get that rejection, that's going to depend on different factors. I do suspect that we're going to go a little bit higher. And then I think SPY will be hit with some tough resistance for this next bearish cycle to play out. And that may bring us back down to our key fib levels, at least a 15-point decline over the next 2-3 weeks before we continue higher approaching October. So that's what I think is going to likely play out for the markets. We'll see if these gaps fill. So it depends on the levels. If we lose 550, then we might end up, coming even lower to fill this gap depending on news. But this is what cyclicals would be suggesting. And you guys can see how well these cycles do have a tendency of playing out. So that's what I'm seeing, at least for SPY, at least for the time being. That's what I'm projecting. But don't turn bearish or officially until we see confirmation of that rejection. The divergences are continuing to develop, and they're just another signal. You could also draw out these cycles on the QQQ. So like this, you could see the QQQ had this low right here. We were in a bullish cycle, so this led to this nice little rally right here. We continue to climb higher and higher and higher into the cycles as we approach this high right here. And then notice that into this cycle, we went from the high all the way down to this low within one move. Then we made a V-shaped recovery back up into the next phase. So this cycle was very, very interesting. We basically had 3 periods of up, 1 period of down, 1 period of back up, but we came short of all-time highs, which makes me inclined. It makes me inclined to think that there might be another cycle of down before we try to continue higher after FOMC. And then we could see, very, very interesting volatility before anything else, before we climb up like this. So I'm just leaning a little bit in that direction. Just wanted to show you guys a rough estimate of how this is going. For the QQQ, we're approaching the end of this cycle right over here, depending on how you draw this out. Um, there is a possible bearish engulfing candle that's forming that could be the sign that this is about to reverse. And the QQQ is looking very weak here because we're hitting some very tough resistance in the 485 area. So we'll be watching as we approach these highs. We could push a little bit, but just know this area is going to be very tough, especially as we approach NVIDIA's earnings. And we're going to be watching to see if we get a dip back down to fill some of these gaps below, especially as we have this big one down here in the 465 area. So that could be our first targets for the low before this continues higher. So I'll be watching that very, very carefully just to see if that ends up being the move. One thing worth mentioning is that if you look at this from a Fibonacci standpoint, this has a very, very nice confluence. So the QQQ is more volatile than SPY during this period because of tech. And we're basically failing to break the 0.786 retracement so far. So from the high, we only went up about the 0.786 retracement area during this rally, and now we're coming just short. So usually when that happens, historically, we do see a little bit of a decline afterwards. So that makes me suspect that we could be declining to the 0.5 retracement at 463 area if 473 breaks. So I do suspect we might be coming down here between the 0.5 and the 0.618, close to the golden pocket. And then we'll see if we get a bounce off that or not. If we don't hold that 463 area, which is where we have that gap, if we break through that, we are at risk of coming all the way down to the 450s, 454 or so to fill that other gap. So we'll see about that. But from a cyclical standpoint, there's a good chance we do decline a bit before we try to rebound, especially after we hit the next cycle. So I'll be watching that very, very carefully. So for the QQQ, that's what I'm basically looking out for. That's going to be another very, very important phase. And I'll be watching to see what kind of cyclical move we make. But this is like what my rough view of the market is for the time being. The best thing to do is just look at this on a daily basis, just to track this. But I suspect that the market is going to attempt to push a little bit higher and something is going to cause a pivot. I don't know if it's going to be cyclicals only or if it's going to be NVIDIA's earnings. Whatever it is, there might be a pivot coming. And I think that the odds favor this next cycle being a little bit more bearish for a temporary decline. I think that's very, very probable. The market's kind of range bound right now. We might just remain range bound for some time before anything else. So we'll see how things go. But that's basically what I'm seeing for the QQQ and SPY, at least for the time being. I just want to give you guys a heads up about this. The next cycle might suggest downsides likely coming. I also want to note that for other factors about how the market moves, FOMC could be the big thing that causes another big pivot. So if we do get a temporary decline after FOMC, the market could try to rally. If we do get some kind of cut, that could bring us right back up if there is a little bit of a decline. So if there is a decline approaching FOMC, that's going to be another good buying opportunity for just the time being if you're like a trader or such. And then after that, there might be another decline in October. I'll talk more about that later on, but that's what I'm seeing. So that's my view of the market in general. So far, we're holding this very, very nicely. But because we're right here right now, we're like in this period right here, generally the market does not start to decline until mid-September. This might come a little bit early because of the big bearish divergence developing and because of the bearish engulfing candles forming on SPY and the QQQ. So that makes me suspect it might just play out a little bit earlier. We may have to just play a game of catch-up later on. So our decline may start as soon as September, for about a week or two before we continue higher going into October. And then in October, that's when we could get the final drop in the markets, a big pullback before we continue to pump for the end of the year after the election. So that's kind of like the cycle I'm seeing that's playing out. So far, things are playing out very nicely. Notice that the market had a tendency of getting declines close to like April before it continues to rally into July. That's very similar to what happened on the S&P 500 chart this year. We got this decline very, very close to April before it continued to rally. We saw this nonstop rally approaching July, and I think the cyclicals are still going to play out very, very nicely. So that's my view of the markets. I think SPY might be forming like a cup and handle here. This could be our cup, and then the handle is about to form. Maybe FOMC will be the trigger for the final pump for the handle before we continue to form a nice looking push. So I'll be watching this all very carefully. With that being said, I want to thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Just want to give you guys a quick heads up about this. With that being said, I'll be back tomorrow to give you guys another update. Until then, I'll talk more about SPY, the QQQ, and everything else in a more meticulous manner. Until then, take care, enjoy your Saturday, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for listening, and peace out.